Hello, colleagues, and welcome to the next episode of DINCast, where we're joined today by Brendan Martin, who is the Managing Director of Beurtorg Britain and Ireland, to tell us all about the Beurtorg model. Welcome along, Brendan.
Thank you, Ian. Great to be here.
So today we're going to have a look at the transformative Beurtorg model. But before we sort of get into that, please tell us a bit about yourself.
Oh, well, I started my working life as a journalist, which was very soon after printing presses were first invented, as you can see. And I was specializing in industrial relations and football, actually, which unusual mix. And then in the 1980s, I was hired by a trade union called NALGO, showing my age again there, Ian, sorry, which stood for the national and local government officers, and has since merged into Unison, which probably you've heard of. The big thing in that decade, of course, was that Mrs. Thatcher was privatizing everything, and my job was to advise the union how to deal with that. And obviously I did a fantastic job because we stopped the whole thing in its tracks. Okay, so we lost more than we won, but to put it mildly, I learned a lot. And the two big lessons I learned were, first, while privatization was seldom the best answer to the failings of public services, it did ask a lot of good questions about public services. And one of the big mistakes unions made at the time, I think, was not to come up with their own answers to those and other questions about how to make public services better. And let's be honest, even now, too many public sector organizations, not just in the public sector, too many public service organizations, I should say, not just in the public sector, but also in the third sector, are not sufficiently responsive to the people they serve, and they're too bureaucratic and too hierarchical. So I've spent pretty much the last 30 years of my working life supporting a different kind of change. In answer, I suppose, to a few questions like, do the people who use public services really get what they need and want from the institutions, organizations, and professionals who provide them? How can the professionals build the kinds of relationships with the people they serve that enable them to co-create solutions? And to work in that way, how should the professionals themselves operate? And what kind of support do they need from their organizations? I suppose, in short, how can we create truly relationship-based services that professionals can enjoy working in, and how can that be done productively so that waste is reduced and qualities increased? And that work led me to Beurtorg after I had the experience of looking after my mum's care needs towards the end of her life, about 10 years ago. What I saw was a fragmented service in which underpaid home care workers and community nurses were doing tasks for people instead of building the kind of relationships with them that would enable them to care for them, support the whole person, and enable people who needed care and support to live as much of the lives they wanted as they could. And on top of that, the professionals, and not just on top of that, but related to that, the professionals were working in bureaucratic organizations that sapped their energy rather than supporting them to be responsive and creative. So after my mum died, I looked around the world for any examples of the kind of community services I would have liked for her and would like for myself when it's my time. And I found Beurtorg. Founded in 2006, it's grown from one team of 4 nurses to be the biggest and most successful provider of community nursing and home care in the Netherlands. And as well as its approach being what I would have wanted for my mum and would want for myself, it's turned into a profitable social enterprise. And so I went to visit, and we began working together to help organizations in Britain and Ireland to learn from its success. And that's what I've been doing for the last 5 years or so.
Wow, that's some journey, that, Brendan. And I love the whole, from tasks to relationship piece. I think you summed that up wonderfully there. So obviously, Beurtorg started off in the Netherlands, and your role is actually to sort of spread the word and hopefully bring some of that methodology across to Britain and Ireland around that. But yeah. So before we sort of get into some of that, could you sort of just bring it to life and give me an example of a complex problem or an issue that as I say, will bring to life how Beurtorg can work in real life?
Yeah, well, it's interesting you put it like that, because of course the community nursing, any kind of nursing, but community nursing included, and home care, is actually complex work that requires a lot of judgment, a lot of flexibility and responsiveness, but seldom are the professionals allowed to work in that way. So Buurtzorg means neighborhood care. Buurt means neighborhood, Zorg means care. And it's all built around the idea of providing support and care to people in their communities in a way that not only provides them with the supports that they need, but mobilizes their own capacities and the, if you like, the community assets around them to help with that. Now we're Buurtzorg is a care provider, but we don't define our purpose that way. We define our purpose as to support people to live the most meaningful and autonomous lives that they can, no matter what their circumstances. And some of the people we support are with us for a short time for reablement. Others are with us for the rest of their lives because they are coming towards the end of their lives. But no matter what situation, our purpose is to enable those people to do what is important to them as much as possible, to live meaningful, autonomous lives with warm social interaction. And so we start with the person needing care and support and work from there. I'll give you an example. You asked for an example. It's one of the organizations we've worked with. We've worked now in Britain with around 40 different organizations, most of them in health and care, some in NHS, some in local government, some in charities and so on. But one example I'll give you, which I think illustrates the approach very well. In one of the places we're working, one of the teams that we've been supporting had an older woman referred to them who had been getting service from the, if you like, conventional community nursing service. And basically, the problem that she was presenting with was very painful leg ulcers. And what was happening with the previous community nursing service was that a district nurse was going in there regularly, very competently, going in there and changing the dressings on the leg ulcers, which were neither getting worse, well, they certainly, which were not getting any better and really were getting worse. And she was a housebound woman by this time. So all sorts of complications were arising, such as loss of confidence to go out, a lot of pain and so on. What our nurse was able to do by building a relationship with her, getting to know what mattered to her, getting to know what her goals were, what her capacities were, who are the people around her in her life, in her neighborhood, in her family that might be able to help, what kind of resources were there in the community that might be able to help. By doing this, by investing time in building that kind of relationship, our nurse was able to support this person to not only dress her leg ulcers, but start to get her mobile and confident again. Now, you might think, well, that's all very well, but how can you possibly have time in cash-strapped public services to do that? And the great piece about it is that, of course, that older woman would have suffered with these ulcers for the rest of her life and would have been getting a service from community nursing for the rest of her life. By working in this way, our team was able to discharge her within months. And that meant that not only was life better for her, not only was this a really great, satisfying outcome for the nurses, but also it saved, in the medium term, it saved money for the system as well. So the approach that our professionals are able to take is first, do what is needed, whether it's clinical or personal care, do what is needed, mobilize the resources that are there in the person you're supporting and the people around them, learn as you go and adapt as you go, and you'll get good results. And those results in turn will enable you to save money, because we all know fantastic care, fantastic job satisfaction isn't going to cut it if you're not able also to use resources more effectively. And we've shown that we tick all three of those boxes.
So it sounds like an absolute no-brainer in terms of what the outcomes actually are, and particularly for the person who's receiving the services. But as you and I sort of know, lots of transformative programs fall by the wayside because organizational culture, struggles to adopt the sort of methodology. So what sort of barriers have you come across within organizations when you're trying to implement the Buurtzorg methodology, and how have you helped leaders overcome them?
Well, you're so right. Of course, this is the biggest challenge we've encountered. As I think I mentioned, we've now worked in about 40 different settings, and a great variety of settings too, NHS, local government, and so on. And I suppose what we've learned boils down to three main lessons. One is that if you enable and support your primary process professionals to work in this way, what they're able to do is truly transformed. And that's not a word I use often, but by transformed, I mean that they're not just doing the same things better. They're doing different things because they're creating, with the people they're caring for and supporting, they're creating new solutions. So that's fantastic for them. It's also fantastic, as in the example I just gave, for the people they're supporting too. But and we have found that those professionals need some learning support to learn how to work in this more person-centered way, how to build that strong relationship with their clients, and indeed how to work together in teams, because our belief is that if you want your professionals to work in this very flexible and responsive way, you can't be telling them what to do. You've got to trust them to do their jobs, recruit the right people, give them the right learning and development support, but then give them the support they need to do their jobs rather than telling them how to do their jobs. And that's really where the big organizational barriers come in, because to grow from some experimental pilot-sized pioneering teams to this becoming the norm in an organization requires fundamental organizational change. If you like, it's a shift from a command and control approach to a serve and support approach. Really, organizations and organizational leaders need to look at their primary process staff, or frontline staff as they're sometimes called. I try not to use that term because I don't like it. But they need to look on their primary process staff as their clients, as their customers, just as they want those workers to look at the clients of the organization as theirs. So a sort of radical change in the mindsets and the culture of the organization itself is the biggest obstacle. And we would say, don't overestimate what you need to tell your professionals in order for them to do their jobs well. They know how to do that, but don't underestimate the scale and nature of the organizational change that's required to really support them. You need to you need to take that seriously. And we'd go so far as, because otherwise, actually, what you'll end up with is two competing cultures in the same organization, and that's not sustainable. And you also won't achieve the financial benefits, which means your transformation of your organization isn't sustainable either. You'll probably indeed increase costs. So if you're not up for really seeing it through, taking it seriously from the senior leadership, overcoming challenges, learning and adapting as you go, learning by doing, if you're not up for that, then you probably better not getting started in the first place.
So the social housing sector has a lot in common with social care. In fact, quite a lot of our members probably do have care arms associated with this. So if we were looking in terms of the transferability into the social housing space, how do you think, how do you think housing organisations could approach this? And what do you think the benefits might be, particularly some of the early wins from a housing organisation, putting into practice the Buurtzorg model?
Well, we've just started working with a social housing provider, actually, but it's early days, and we'll see how it goes. It's going very well so far, I must say. So we're very encouraged by that. We don't claim to know much about the social housing sector, but what we would say is, if you take the principles, you need to think about what those principles mean for your own purpose. Now, for example, is the purpose of a social housing provider to provide a home in exchange for rent? Yes, well, obviously it is, in the same way that Buurtzorg's purpose is to provide care. But just like Buurtzorg defines its purpose as being to support people to live meaningful and autonomous lives with warm social interaction, because we think that's what people want, it's worth thinking, I think, as a social housing provider, is what really matters to your tenants. It's not just having a roof over their head. What kind of community do they want to live in? What kind of relationships do they want to have with other tenants and with you as a provider? And start from there to define your purpose. And then I think from that purpose, you can get into thinking, well, what if that's our purpose, what do we want in terms of the behaviors of our primary process workers, I suppose housing officers? What do we want from them each day? What kind of relationships do we want them to build with our customers? What kind of work, the teamwork, do we want them doing with each other? And start from there, and then think, well, how does this, and then the answers will suggest themselves. So I don't think you need a big plan. I think you just need to think about, what's our purpose? What are the principles here in terms of what we would see as universal human values, actually? People, when they go to work, want to be able to work in a way that builds trust, that has trust in them and enables them to build trust with the people that they're serving. And I don't think, you can look at one sector to another, but we're all human beings. And I think some of those are universal. So, but you don't have to plan it out too much in advance. We would always say, get started, see what you learn, and learn as you go.
And how long does it sort of normally take for some initial results, or, as I say, some quick wins to start to come through, so leadership teams can look at that and say, wow, this is already starting to have an impact?
Well, of course it will vary, but one indicator of that is that when Buurtzorg's grown from one team in 2007 to 950 teams now, and they're all self-managed teams. Buurtzorg has, they're supported by 21 regional coaches, so that's one coach for about 45 teams. That means that the coaches don't get too involved with the teams. The role of the coach is to support the teams to find their own solutions to their problems. And then a very small back office of about 50 people. So why has Buurtzorg succeeded in this? It succeeded financially, it succeeded for two reasons. One is that the way of working that I've been describing, although it involves a lot, indeed, because it involves considerable investment right up front in building those relationships, that return on investment comes pretty quickly. And Buurtzorg has reduced over the last 10 years the number of hours of professional input from Buurtzorg nurses per client on average has been reduced by half because of this approach of co-creating solutions to enable people, the clients of Buurtzorg, to self-manage their own care more with the support of people around them. Now, quite what that looks like in housing, of course, your members will know much better than me. But enabling those relationships, enabling your professionals to work in this way, our experience is the results can show themselves very quickly. A rule of thumb for Buurtzorg is when a new team starts in Buurtzorg in one of two ways. Either in a new area, if a group of nurses says, oh, there's no Buurtzorg team here, can we start one? And there's an induction process, obviously, and they all become, it's like a micro enterprise, but they're all directly employed by, secure employment relationships by Buurtzorg. That's one way for a team to start. And the other way is for when a team gets to 12, because we know that beyond the number of 12, it becomes too difficult for a team to self-manage without a hierarchy in the team and without a manager in the team or outside the team. So one of our rules is when you get to 12, you need to divide. But so that's how it's grown. There are now 950 teams. When a team starts, typically they need about 6 months to be able to be breaking even after 6 months. So, and what we've noticed is the results that we can see in terms of much better care and fantastically improved working lives also is very visible after 6 months. But I mentioned earlier the crucial factor of changing the way your organizational functions to become really responsive, to be a leaner and more agile organization, to learn as you go and to do what is needed when it's needed and don't do what isn't needed at all. That if you don't do that, then of course you won't get the benefits. But if you're really committed to that sort of change, we believe you can show the results after 6 months, and you'll be able to sustain and improve financial results from then on.
I mean, I love the idea of the self-managing teams, but I can imagine that in traditional organizations who've got a bit of a hierarchy, that could create some sort of tension between different departments or different operating teams and things like that. So how do you go about getting the right stakeholders involved so they see the bigger picture and they don't sort of, act as blockers or a negative about establishing this new way of working?
Great question. I mean, what we found is what works best when you're making a transformation within an existing organization. And of course, Biotsog had the great advantage of being a startup. So it didn't have that problem. But when you're making this sort of but we are succeeding in a few cases with transformation of existing organizations. We've learned that what you need to do is start with the most willing in your organization. We find that the professionals themselves generally break down into three categories, self-selecting categories, I should say. There are some that think, oh, this is great, can't wait to get started, I want to be in the pioneer teams. A second category that says, well, let's see how these pioneer teams get on and then we'll see. And of course, those pioneer teams become ambassadors for change and start to convince the less committed. Then there are some that probably aren't going to enjoy this way of working, and that might not be very many people, but it's best to recognize that might happen. Now, of course, it's also a big challenge to middle management, particularly in organizations with lots of layers of management, because you are going to need to change the way the organization functions, keeping things simple, doing without middle management, quite frankly. Biotsog doesn't have middle management. It has 950 self-managed teams, and it has a back office, and it has two chief executives working jointly, one looking to support the teams and one looking to support the back office, and that's about it. So that's, that kind of change means you are going to have to really communicate well with everybody in the organization, but start with the willing. So the senior leaders, I think, need to really think about, what does this involve for everybody in this organization? Let's have a candid conversation about that, but let's also show that we're serious about this and we're going to see it through. And then your primary process workers, your housing officers, let them deal with the relationships with the customers. Because if you create an environment in which they can build those trustful relationships with the customers, I don't think you need to worry about that too much. Let them be the ones that do that. And of course, any external stakeholders, your senior leadership needs to be engaging with them and keeping them in the picture too.
That all sounds absolutely, almost utopian. I would imagine that coming out of the pandemic, people will be looking for new ways of building back their organisation. So I would certainly, recommend people go and have a look at all of the material that is out there for Biotsog. But for this episode of DINCast, Brendan, thank you very much for sharing those insights, and I hopefully look forward to working with you again in the future.